children's literature. I work in that field. It's a hard gig to get. She didn't quite make her final words happen, but on her last day, the last really sort of intelligible thing that happened with Nana is she was in a hospital bed in Barbara's room, and Barbara was helping her get situated. Could not have been kinder or gentler with it. And Nana yelled at her, "Elder abuse!" and then gave her the finger. And then cracked like a little smile, like the last little smile that she had, just to let everyone know that, like, however it got, she could still bring a good joke. And in that spirit, I'm here to introduce tonight's program. So I'm John, joined with my mom. And Nan always said that when she died, she wanted to have a party. And well, it's true, or at least I think it's true, that funerals or memorials or celebrations are for the living, not the dead. We're not uninterested in doing what she wanted. And she wanted all of you to come together and have a party, celebrate. And we may have taken this a little further by presenting an actual improvised musical about her life. But before we get to that, I'm going to say a few things. So my mother, as many of you know, was a professor of a lot of things, actually, one of which being rhetoric, and speech giving and talking in public. And some of that has rubbed off on me, and you'll forgive me if it seems a bit cliche, that in this moment of a funeral oration, I look and will talk about the work of the great ancient Greek historian Thucydides, and more specifically his history of the Peloponnesian Wars. I know, it's a cliche. For those of you that aren't fans of oratory and rhetoric, Thucydides' Chronicle of the Peloponnesian Wars included, we find in it, the funeral oration of Pericles. And this speech, this funeral oration, was known for over 2,000 years as the greatest funeral oration ever written or delivered. And in this speech, he basically said this. Said, since we now have this tradition of offering words, in honor of the great ones who have fallen, I find this to be a problematic task. Because when I speak of this great person, to those who knew them well and were profoundly impacted by that person, my words will fall short. Alternatively, there will be people who feel that I am overstating the greatness of the deceased and be pissed or jealous or some other damn thing. I'm paraphrasing. Get the idea. But a eulogy in some way is an unwinnable proposition, because how could we possibly, any of us, in a speech, convey the meaning of a great person? And that speech was held up as the greatest articulation of a funeral oration for thousands of years. And this was still true among scholars of rhetoric when leaders of this particular country decided there should be a speech like this following the battle at Gettysburg. And so they needed someone to write and deliver the Gettysburg Address. So obviously, as you all know, they went to Edward Everett. And so Everett was a Harvard classics professor. He's a former Secretary of State and a big fan of the Pericles funeral oration. And so the day came, and he went up and he gave the Gettysburg Address. And he spoke for 2 hours with a speech that mirrored, echoed Pericles' funeral oration. And when he was done, as was the style at the time, the president came up and gave 3 minutes of closing remarks. And it was this moment in American history that we decided that's what we liked better. So much so that they all decided that Lincoln's 3 minutes at the end was the real Gettysburg Address. And I find myself in the position now of Everett, because I know that no matter what I say, I could talk for 2 hours with elegant terms, rhetoric, and oratory steeped in figurative language. The only thing that y'all are going to remember are the improvised songs that are going to begin in about 15 minutes. And so I am not going to speak about hours for my mother, but I'm going to tell a little story. But before I even begin telling a quick story about my mom, I feel I must tell an even shorter story about my father, Howard Stanley McClay. When Howard died, it did not occur to us to host an improvised musical to mark his death. possible, actually no, it's definite that he was the person you had met in your life who had read the most books. And this is just math, because he read constantly, and he lived to be 90. He read the most books. And I want to tell you now about the greatest regret in his life. A little wisdom from the elders. So if you encounter this situation, perhaps you can avoid having this regret in your life. Howard was a professor of linguistics. And when I was in middle school, he would pick me up every Friday from St. Matthew's Catholic School, and we would drive to a used bookstore just north of downtown in Champaign, Illinois, called the Book Nook. And the Book Nook allowed me to subscribe to comic books, which I could get the new ones that came in each Friday. And while I was doing that, he would browse all the used books and usually buy a couple of them. And one day, he found this yellow, trashy-looking piece of pulp detective fiction. And the title of this book was The Case of the Cunning Linguist. And at that time, I didn't know why that was funny, but I knew that he thought it was the greatest thing he'd ever seen. He put it back on the shelf, and for the next week, he talked about it. And when we returned the following Friday, he decided he was going to buy it, and it wasn't there. His failure to purchase The Case of the Cunning Linguist was the greatest regret of his life. And I know, like, you're clapping. Some of you at this point are like, yeah, okay, that's a good bit. That's funny. I'm sure that wasn't the greatest regret of his life. And I would say to you, if I had heard that story dozens of times. And with each telling, the only consistency was the line, and that was the greatest regret of my life. And look, I don't know everyone here. I know a lot of you, and even those who I do know. I don't know what your personal case of the cunning linguist is. But I do know when you find it, you should acquire it and keep it forever. And now, since these amazing people at the Revival Theater have agreed to put on an improvised musical about my mother, despite knowing nothing about her. What comedian doesn't want to play a funeral? I'm going to say some things about her life to aid in this process, right? They should have some material. So, I'll tell those. Joanna Lynn Hawkins was born 87 years ago today. Happy birthday. Her mother was Alexis Hawkins, who had been a model, and her father was Marvin Hawkins, an independent businessman who looked exactly like me. He went up to New York to be a tenor and failed. I can't relate to that. He was an independent businessman in Birmingham, Alabama. He was the first mobile locksmith in Birmingham. He then ran a successful pen store where he said, if your pens aren't selling at 12 for $1, charge $3 a piece and watch them fly off the shelves. He was also a political crony and ally of the segregationist George Wallace. I believe he was a member of the Birmingham White Citizens Council, which my mother described to me as the Ku Klux Klan, but in suits. He later had a plan to become generationally wealthy when he had a business plan with a Georgia Peach partner, the estate of Mr. Bojangles, and a backroom deal with George Wallace to become the single provider of Mr. Bojangles peach schnapps to every state-run liquor store in Alabama. However, a pesky reporter doing a study of corruption in politics for the Birmingham Times caught on to it. And George Wallace had to tell Marvin that the deal was off. And in that moment, George Wallace and the Hawkins household magically transformed from our greatest American patriot into that sumbitch Wallace. My mother went to the University of Alabama for 4 years studying theater, and this was paid for by the Miss Alabama pageant, where she had finished either 3rd, 4th, or 5th place 5 years in a row. You see, in the 1950s, you received 1 free year of college if you finished in 3rd, 4th, or 5th place. Also, on Sunday, the last day when they got down to the final 5, that was the talent show. They wanted the talent show to be good. My mother was a stand-up comedian. So, some woman I don't know, the novelist Fannie Flagg, And my mother finished third, fourth, and fifth 5 years in a row. There were 2 actual contestants who might win, and then these 3 to make sure the talent show didn't suck. And that paid for 4 years at Alabama, and her first year as a PhD student at Northwestern. When she came up to Northwestern, her parents, my grandparents, were apparently really concerned that she had taken up with the Jews. They were, however, blissfully unaware that she had also taken up with the gays. She graduated, taught for a year at Northern Illinois, and then taught for over 30 years at the University of Illinois, where she I'm so glad Illinois played last night. She'd been so pissed about her funeral during Illinois. She taught rhetoric, adaptation, oral interpretation of literature, and just about everything in theater. She met Howard. She had a couple of kids. She fought for women's rights at the university. She won a shit ton of awards. And at one point took a sabbatical to run for governor of North Carolina. She loves scotch, and she may have been the greatest White Sox fan in history. And now I will tell just a quick story about her stealing a page from Lincoln. This will be much shorter than the introduction leading up to it. When I was a child, our family would drive to Birmingham each year, summer, to spend many weeks with my grandmother. Marvin had died when I was a toddler. I didn't know him, but my grandmother's still there. And aunts and cousins. And one year, I'm not actually sure how old I was, maybe 8 or 9. We were there the days leading up to the 4th of July. And my cousin Al, who is a year or 2 older than me, had been talking of the idea of acquiring fireworks. And that sounded pretty good to me. But he said, you can't get them like in town, the local 5 and dime, we gotta like drive somewhere. And Nana, my mother, volunteered to take us. And so the fire escort was a trailer on the side of the highway in what felt to me like the least populated part of Alabama. This would have been 1980. We entered the trailer and it was packed with fireworks, just 3 cramped aisles of things that lit up and blew up and made horrible noises. And it was like the best place I'd ever seen at that point. And my cousin Al had been teaching me about fireworks because he knew about that shit. And he said, hey, there are these things called whistle chasers. They make the most horrible noise you've ever heard. And I want to get some. And I said, great, I don't know anything about that, let's do it. And so we walked up and down the aisles and we couldn't find them. And finally he goes up to like the counter and says, do you have any whistle chasers? I can't find them. And I hadn't really seen the guy who ran the store. Because he was sitting down, and when we approached, he stood up, and he was instantly the scariest human being I'd ever seen. He was enormous. And when I say like enormous, like, well, was he like tall or muscular? Did he have a giant head? Yes, all of those things. And he also had a green camouflage shirt with the sleeves cut off. He had a mesh trucker hat. His face and shoulders were significantly and sort of unevenly sunburned, and he had a chunk of chewing tobacco in his lip, which he spit in his can. And at that point, I'd heard the word redneck. But this was like my first time encountering one in the wild. And I said, do you have whistle chasers? And the redneck smiled. He said, oh, yeah, we got them down that aisle. Of course, I never heard them called whistle chasers. I always heard them called, and then he said the most racist word I'd ever heard, followed by chasers. You take one of them, throw them at a pack of racist word, I won't say plural, and watch them scare. I'm not going to say the word he used. And at that point, I'd only even heard that word in one other context. A couple of years prior, I had received a prized present, my first record player. And I'd asked for 3 albums as an 8-year-old. Kenny Rogers' Greatest Hits, The Oak Ridge Boys, and most prized of all to me, the Muppet movie soundtrack. Joanna, however, felt I needed a 4th album, so she bought me the original Broadway soundtrack to the musical Hair. And this is where I heard a lot of new words. sports trailer in rural Alabama from this scary redneck, I remember thinking, well, this isn't just a redneck. This is like a member of the Klan, and we're about to die. And we should run. We should run. We should get out of here before we die. But I'm like, this is easy. Mom's from here. She's going to want to run. Nope. I looked up, and she was not ushering us out the door. She wasn't even paying any attention to me. She was locked in on this dude. Her heels dug into the ground. She says, oh, really? Because I always heard them called redneck chasers. You find yourself a pack of dumbass rednecks, throw them in and watch them scatter. And I thought, I would love to tell you that in that moment at age 8, I was like, oh, my mom's bad. But at the moment, I thought, oh, God, Mom just got us killed. I looked over, like, oh, I guess we're just going to die. And the scary redneck is now looking at her, and he is shook. He's like, oh. He looked intimidated, which I thought was strange. Because if it came to violence, I felt like he could take the 2 small children and the middle-aged lady with that mask. But he didn't do anything. He just sort of bowed his head and said, oh, yeah, the whistle chasers are right there. We trotted off to get him. We checked out. We got the hell out of there alive. And there are a lot of things I remember about my mother. The teaching, the White Sox, the scotch, the stories. Her last act making a joke, giving us the finger. How much you really loved me. But mostly, right now, I find myself returning the truth of however much fun she was also a real tough broad who would stand up to evil. And we're now, not now, as we continue to live in a world rife with evil, may we all carry that strength with us going forward. Yes. Ready to laugh. So what we're going to do is we're just going to take a little break so people can go to the potty, get one more drink.